So we are going to get started. Brad has a lot of good information about how colleges are, looking at essays, and then we also ask people to send in some of their students' own essays, and we have two. I don't know, maybe if we have time, 3 essays to go through.
We might get through 3, at least
Okay.
2.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we did this last time, and hopefully you guys hang around because it was fun. It was almost like a class, dissecting somebody's essays, and whoever it is, really do not feel badly. It's really you'll get a lot of good, feedback. And just kind of seeing how Brad goes through the essay, I think is really insightful for other people. And even you as a parent, as you're reading your student's essay and kind of like, taking that viewpoint of what you should be critical about and what maybe you don't need to be critical about.
Yeah. It's fantastic from like a parent perspective to actually go through this together, because it helps you identify like within your own student what we should be working on. But just as like a very quick background on us, and we'll cover about maybe 10 total minutes of content actually before we dive into the essays themselves. But my name is Brad. I was the founder and the CEO of a company called Prompt. Our mission is to make people better writers. One of the things that we do is related to college admissions essays, and we just so happen to be the largest provider of college admissions essay coaching and feedback in the world by a lot. So we support thousands and thousands of students per year on college admissions essays with one-on-one coaching, feedback on essays, boot camps, all sorts of things like that. We work directly with high schools. We have hundreds of high schools that recommend our services as well to their students. And you can buy like just one review from us. You can just use our free tools. You can get one-on-one coaching on one essay or a bunch of essays. Like all of that is a possibility, which we'll dive into. But the number one thing that I always start with, and I'm going to share my screen as we go ahead and get started here. But the number one thing that I always start with is really like helping people understand their audience. Okay. So, and this is really, really important, because with anything that you write, you have to consider what your audience actually really cares about. And unfortunately, for most students, this is the first time in their lives that they have written for an audience that's not their teacher. And most of the time, they're not being taught what their actual audience, the college admissions officers, are looking for or care about. Okay, so that's what we're going to start with today, because a lot of people end up focusing on the wrong things. All right, and then we're actually going to apply what we learn here to essays that we're actually going to read. Okay. And I have not looked at these essays yet, other than the first couple of words. And chances are, and I just know this because I've seen tens of thousands of essays, and most of them have the same problem where they're not considering their audience. It's the single number one problem with most essays and the content of them.
Okay. Brad, I think it's actually great that you haven't read it before, because think about it. When the essay comes in front of an admissions officer, right? They don't.
Oh, no, I do this on purpose.
Yeah.
I do it on purpose. There's no, like, I like seeing it fresh. Like I have not looked at them. And so this is why it's so important. Like when we're thinking about like our college admissions officers, what do they actually really care about? And how are they evaluating applicants? It all comes down to, and like the Dean of Admissions at Emory puts this really well, it comes down to evaluating potential. Okay, so I like to say it as that the entire purpose of the application is to prove you'll be successful in college and after you graduate. All right, and basically what that means is that if you're accepted into the college, that you are likely to attend the college, you are likely to graduate from the college, which matters because guess what? This is they want you to pay all the tuition, basically. So it matters when you graduate from college. It matters if you do well and have good grades in college. It matters you graduate and you get a job. These are all things that the colleges are measured on, by the way. And it matters that you go and have an impact on various things in the world. And, if you happen to make some money and donate it back to the college as well, that's also nice, right? So this is really what it comes down to. How do you prove success, that you will be successful in college and beyond through your applications? Now, there's the academic side of things, right? There's a lot of data that shows that strong academic backgrounds, standardized test scores, other things like that, have strong correlations with graduation rates and strong correlations with grades that students get in college. But there's also the non-academic side of this, which matters a lot. And we're going to talk about how much that matters in just a second, which really comes down to the essays, your activities list, like how you write about your experiences and your activities and everything like that in your life, your recommendations, and that piece of it is also really critical. So when we think about essays, there's this huge myth, okay? And the myth is that essays are about telling your story. Now, you might be thinking, wow, Brad's really full of it, because all of the advice that I get is that all I have to do is tell my story. That's what all the admissions officers say that I need to do. That's what the counselors say that I have to do. That's literally what everybody says that I have to do. And guess what? When you actually look at how colleges actually evaluate applicants and actually evaluate essays, telling your story is only a piece of the puzzle. What you need to do is you need to tell your story that relates to proving that you'll be successful in college and beyond. That's different than just telling your story. So what ends up happening is that everybody is like, oh, I need to tell my story. I need to tell about my family background or other things like that about me, and like what I, tell about like some well-written moment in my life or other things like that. And guess what? Like, that's nice. But at the end of the day, does that prove you're going to be successful in college and beyond? And the answer is, like, for a lot of the essays we read, and by a lot, I mean like the vast majority that we read that do not consider this, are not great. Like, the content is not strong. And what I mean by that is that they actually don't talk about any of the 5 traits that prove that you're going to be successful in college and beyond. Okay. So these are basically the 5 traits that colleges look for in applicants. As Debbie always says, like, these are the same 5 traits that, like, if you're looking to get a job, this is how people are evaluating, yep. Right? You're going to get promoted. Like, this is kind of the 5 traits that people are evaluating on. Like, guess what? These matter, right? Everywhere, because they prove that you've been successful. Like, success in the past signals that you're likely to be successful in the future, right? So these are 5 traits that you want to show through your experiences, activities, what, cultural background, whatever it is, you need to show one or more of these 5 traits. So this is really critical information. So I'm going to talk about each of these. We're then going to apply these 5 traits and actually search for them within the essays that we are reading. That's one of the key things that we're going to do. And so I'm going to talk about these very briefly. So the first is drive. So these are students that, no matter what situation they find themselves in, no matter how challenging that situation is, no matter how long the odds are of succeeding, these are people that get through difficult and challenging situations and come out a better person, not by just like passively sitting there and waiting for stuff to happen to them, but by actually actively taking actions that better their situation. Okay. So, for example, there's like this whole consortium of different colleges that get together to talk admissions every single year. And one of the things that they've really focused on is grit. So students that are gritty and get through these difficult times and challenges are more likely to be successful. It's the same thing as drive. I prefer the word drive than grit. I think it's a little broader of a term, but it's the same thing, right?
It doesn't mean that you had to have had some horrible event.
That's what I'm saying. It's like, grit is kind of like, oh, horrible situation. Drive is more of like, hey, like I have done something really compelling, or like I learned something that and put a lot of time into something, right? Or there was this challenging situation that I was in, or I found myself in this time in my life where I needed to improve, and like I pushed through, took actions, and improved, right? So it's this broader term. And when I was talking to the dean of admissions at MIT a few years ago, and we're talking about the 5 traits, and this is one that he like really like hones in on, right? So he's like, even in a pool of incredibly driven students, I am still looking for the students that are unusually driven. So in other words, even amongst the most driven applicants, he's looking for the ones that are more driven than the rest. right? And he can tell that basically through the essays, portfolios, other pieces of the application. That's how they're identifying these things, okay? And that's why this is really important. Next is intellectual curiosity. These are students that love to learn just for the fun of it in their free time. They're like the self-learners of the world. And they're trying to gain like a deeper understanding in subjects or topics in which they're interested in. Sometimes this is related to academics related subjects. Sometimes this is not. I've seen some really good essays on intellectual curiosity with video games randomly, right? Like, or sports or other things like that. But it's really about like self-improvement. It's about learning how to get better at something, how to get deeper knowledge and how to think about it and think critically about things. This is extremely important because guess what? Students that are intellectually curious, when they get to college, they're going to want to keep learning. They want to keep improving. And those students are going to be successful. And guess what? After they graduate, they're also going to be successful, right? Because learning does not stop at the end of college. The third is initiative. So these are students who are really entrepreneurial, not willing to accept the status quo. Whatever organization they're a part of, they're kind of like, there's a way to make this better. And not only are they identifying ways to make it better, they're actually acting on it, right? They're actually actively improving whatever they're a part of. Those are students that take the initiative. The fourth is contribution. These are students that whatever group of people they're a part of, that group is better as a result of their being there. Okay, colleges love these students because these are the connective tissue across the entire campus. So if you think of like a huge value that colleges are providing is the network of other students. So what they want to make sure they have is these like super connectors, these people that are unusual contributors that are going to make the rest of the student body in the campus all better as a result of their being there. That's really important for them because that's a huge part of the value that they're driving and they're providing to students. And then the fifth is diversity of experiences. So different students come from different backgrounds, have different ways of thinking, have different interests, different ways of thinking about the world, different perspectives that they can add to the student body. And this is really important as well, okay? And this doesn't just go for like racial ethnic backgrounds. You know, it has to do with geography, ideas. It has to do with interests. It has to do with like what you might even be majoring in. So an example that I like to use, just because the data is out there, because of there was a court case against Harvard for admissions a number of years ago, and I read through the thousands of pages of court case documents and kind of put a synopsis together of what was going on in the admissions process. And one of the things that really jumped out at me is all of these schools say that it doesn't really matter what you want to major in, or say that it doesn't really matter what career you want to go in the future. And that's all false information. Because when you actually look at by career intent for students applying to Harvard, the admission rate, if you want to go into medicine, is about 4%. And this is like older data. So 2015 to 2019 was about 4% admission rate. If you wanted to be a teacher, it was an 11% admission rate. Okay. So like just like a 3x difference in admissions rates based off of like the types of careers that people wanted to go into, because the school doesn't want everybody to go into medicine. They don't want everybody to go into, you know, finance or computer science or different things like that. They want to have a well-rounded group of students with different interests. Okay. That doesn't mean like, hey, if you want to go into medicine, like lie and say you want to go into something else. Like that's not a great choice, because you have to have experiences that are kind of tied to that in the first place. This is really important to just understand, right? Is that what schools say is not necessarily the actions that they're actually taking. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. And what we really need to do is look at the data behind it. But a lot of the schools don't release the data. So instead, it's just really important to understand these are the 5 traits. Like we need to make sure one or more of these traits come across in each of our essays. We need to focus on our strengths, and that is the best that we can do in order to be successful in the applications. Okay, it's really important. All right, I'm going to pause here because I always get a couple of questions here. And we're going to look at these 5 traits in the context of each of these essays coming up. But Debbie, is there any points you wanted to bring up or anything that you wanted to touch on?
The only thing I'll bring up, and this is actually from an interview I did with and I don't have her book in front of me, it's back there, but I did with
you didn't get the book this time either, Demi? I think you were going to mention it again.
Because I love the visual that at least she gave me. And so the woman is Becky Sabke. She was a former admissions officer at Dartmouth College. She wrote a book this summer called Valedictorians at the Gate. And what she said is, as an admissions officer, and I think it kind of plays to what Brad's talking about with the 5 traits, and actually essays and applications, is that she kind of viewed herself as a lawyer, and she was trying to put together pieces of evidence as a case, for a student to kind of say, this is the right student for the college. And so she can only do that if she's got like the evidence in front of her, and the evidence comes from the application. It comes from the essays. So that's why these pieces of the application are so important. An admissions officer only knows as much as you tell them, and you show them. And so, that's kind of, what, Brad's kind of trying to get across with these traits. And even better if what you share and tell them and show them fall into these traits that they know make successful people and successful people at their college. And we know make honestly successful people throughout life, and it doesn't mean you have to have all 5 of these traits, but if you can show 2 of them, you are above the fold.
Yeah. And by the way, it's truly incredible just how much of a leg up doing well on your essays can get you. Because if you look at the data, and the only reason why I use Harvard is because it's the only publicly released data, because nobody wants to release this data, basically. They were forced to, is that when you look at a non-academic profile for a student, so there's like this thing called an academic bar, and over 80% of students that are applying to Harvard believes are capable of being academically successful at Harvard. Okay. Over 80%, it's like 83%. Now, they can't accept all of those students, right? So how are they differentiating between the students? And by the way, this doesn't just go for Harvard, this goes for all the schools. And we're going to talk about when essays matter and when they matter less in a second. But then you look at the non-academic side of the application and what we call the personal score, which is heavily reliant on essays. And what you find is that only 1 in 5 students that are applying have strong personal scores, which are tied to essays, okay? And when you actually look at the data, going from like a sufficient personal score, which is about 4 in 5 of the students, to a strong personal score, which is about 1 in 5 of the students, you get a 10x increase in your admissions chances. That's how much this matters, like literally a 10x increase. And a lot of that has not to do with, at least in my experience, a lot of that is all of these students tend to have like really compelling experiences and backgrounds, but some of them are just not writing about their experiences in the right ways that actually, to Debbie's point, actually makes their case for them. Okay. And we just see this all the time, all the time. The differences you will see in the first drafts of even the highest performing students that we work with to the last drafts are massive, just massive changes. And this really matters. And it matters at the highest levels. It matters really across all institutions. And this is like the short synopsis of when essays may matter for you, because this may not apply to you. But basically the general gist of it is that essays really matter for highly selective colleges. So these are like under 15% admit rates, selective colleges for 15 to 50% admit rates, where your academics are sufficient, but may not be strong compared to other applicants. That's really hard to tell, by the way, a lot of times. So we always say, just put your best effort forward on essays, but you can kind of get a sense of it if you look at like your grades, your kind of how strong of a curriculum that you took, your maybe standardized test scores. You can compare that to other students that were admitted. If you're in like the top quartile or so, you're in pretty good shape at like a selective institution to get in without necessarily having really a strong focus on essays. And then large colleges where you're applying to highly desirable programs, such as computer science, or applying out of state. So if you're applying to like the University of Washington, for example, for computer science, that has a much lower admit rate than applying to the University of Washington for other programs. Okay, because they're known for computer science. It's much more competitive. And some of these schools don't even publish how the admit rates actually differ, but they differ like significantly. And the the standardized test scores and the that students have, and the GPAs, like the grades, the strength of curriculum, all of that sometimes really differs pretty significantly for certain majors, or sometimes depending on the institution for out of state versus in state. Okay, and this really, really, really matters. And so, you kind of have to look at the institutions where you're applying in terms of where essays matter and what you're applying for. So for the University of California system, where, and I know that a lot of people are probably thinking about that this month, given the deadline coming up, in some instances, the essays may not matter very much at all for you. If you're applying to certain majors that have less students applying, less competitive in some ways, or different institutions. Computer science at University of California, Berkeley, much harder to get into than potentially other programs at the University of California, Berkeley, just because of what people are interested in. So that it varies quite a bit by student how important the essays may be, even for the University of California system. But essays matter less for like selective colleges where your academics are really strong compared to other applicants, or large colleges where you're applying in state or applying to less competitive programs. Okay. Now, all of this is very variable, right? And it's actually really hard to tell for your individual situation, like how you're going to fare, because a lot of the data is not truly public. You can kind of maybe look at the average across an institution, but you can't necessarily tell by the certain major that you're applying to, or you might look at the average, but that may not deal with your specific high school, which matters. Like there's a lot of different variables that come into play here. So I would say it's like, just put in the few hours of effort and do a really good job on the essays. That's basically what it comes down to.
And Brett,
Okay.
also, maybe just to emphasize, and it's essays with an S at the end, because there is a lot of emphasis on, the main Common App essay, which is important,
Oh,
but
yeah.
just as important are the supplemental essays, because you can have this really strong main essay, but if the supplemental essays aren't as strong, that actually they might kind of say, like, wonder what's going on.
Well, also as I always say, it's not like you get a score on each individual essay and then they average them together. That's not what happens. Okay. What happens is they kind of read the totality of your essays, recommendations, sometimes activities list is also included within this. And they read all of that together and they use that to basically put like a specific score in place, and then make some notes on your application, like 3 to 4 sentences worth. Okay. So this is really important. It's not just like we see a lot of students really focus a lot on their Common App essay, and then they wait till the last minute on their supplements, and then they're not in great shape. And maybe they have a great Common App essay, but the supplements are not great.
And sometimes the supplements are, I find them, working with my own kids, harder because you've got fewer words to get across.
Yeah, and by the way, like a huge thing that I find myself doing is helping students, because this is a skill that's not taught in schools. And actually I had a parent message me that I was for a student I was working with, and she said he has learned more working with you and your writing coaches than he has in all of his English classes across all grades, all schools. And a big thing that we have to do is help students identify how to reduce word count. So a lot of this is like eliminating redundant information, identifying like what's relevant and significant, and eliminating information that's not that, how to eliminate details that are not necessary, right, to the overall story. Like this is hard. It's like really hard stuff. And like we find ourselves spending like a good amount of time with students on that, and then teaching and training the students how to do that themselves, right, is a huge piece of this. But you're spot on there, Debbie. Like the word count can be really tough with those, to make sure that you're really fitting in the totality of content that you need to do across the application. Because when we work with students, the first thing that we do is we develop an application plan where we say, what's all of your most compelling content? Let's make sure we understand what that is. And then we need to make sure that all of that content needs to fit on each application. It's got to fit somewhere, right? And different applications have different numbers of essays. Sometimes it goes additional information sections change, right? Sometimes like you got to change some essays. Sometimes you got to change different things, but you got to make sure that entire picture is on each application, because a lot of students struggle with that actually, and they leave out really important stuff. Okay, so we're going to go into a couple of essays, but just one housekeeping item first. You can go to prompt.com/road to college. You should do that. I think at least probably close to like a couple hundred plus road to college families have done this, maybe more than that now. I have to look at the numbers.
Oh, I think it's over 300. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Highly recommend doing it. And right now we have like $100 off on our one-on-one coaching programs for this week only through Sunday. But tonight only, you get an extra $10 off. So if you already have an essay, one of the best things you can do, it's almost like what we're going to do tonight, except longer than what we're going to do tonight per essay, but an essay tune-up session. So we'll actually, one of our coaches will read through the essay, discuss it with you, develop a plan for how to improve it. You can go forth and do that, or you can buy individual reviews of essays after that. Or you can roll that into doing one-on-one coaching kind of across all of your essays or one of your essays, your choice. But I'd highly recommend getting started with this this week. We also have programs just for if you're only applying to the University of California personal insight questions, which are 4 essays that are 350 words in length. We have a program for that as well. You'll have to contact us because I don't think that's like the one you buy specifically on this page. So, but you can.
And Brad, what's the turnaround time? I'm just kind of, because some people, their kids might still be going for the November 15th deadline.
Yeah. So if you get started right now, like this week, you can still do this for the November 15th deadline. If you're applying for the University of California system, I'd highly recommend just signing up this week and getting started right away, especially if you haven't made much progress on it yet. And also don't think like, oh, I have a draft, like I'm in really good shape. Guess what? Most of the students that we're working with, like their drafts are pretty much, their first drafts get completely scrapped for the most part, because there's so many changes that they need to make to them because they're not focusing on the right things in those drafts. And so we don't have like a deadline set for needing to buy by a certain date, but I would strongly recommend if you're doing University of California personal insight questions, like get started by November 15th at the latest. Okay.
And and for the UCs, is there do you have a special package? Is that
yeah,
what you said?
it is.
Okay.
It's not on there on the page, which is prompt.com/road to college. But it's $100 more than the Common App personal statement one-on-one coaching. Okay. But you can contact us and, we'll, you get an extra $10 off tonight, also known as whenever our development team wakes up in the morning to turn off the discount code. But if you're contacting us about the University of California personal insight questions stuff, we'll give, we can keep the extra $10 discount because we'll have to send you an invoice specifically for that. But that I highly recommend doing. We have hundreds of students that just do that program with us. Okay, great. All right, let's go into some essays. All right, we got one first. I'm going to read this essay out loud. If you are a parent of the student that is, or the student yourself that wrote the essay, and you want to discuss it, you can come up actually live and we'll have a discussion related to it. But the thing that I'm going to have every single person do as we are going through this is I want you to focus on identifying what did I learn about the students, in particular, what may be related to the 5 traits that we have, number 1. Number 2 question that we always ask ourselves is, what didn't I learn that I wanted to learn from the essay? And then number 3 is this essay well structured, or how would I restructure the essay to make it better? Okay. So a lot of times when we're providing feedback, a huge thing that we do that's really valuable that students love is like we comment on like what we learned about the student, on their content, how to improve it, and then we provide an example outline that they can work from for improving their essay. Okay, so I'm going to read this out loud. If this is your essay, if you want to jump up here and actually read it out loud, that's great too.
But there's also no pressure. They don't have to.
But no pressure, right? And if you want to come up live and discuss it, great. If not, Debbie and I will just discuss it. So all good.
No, and people can put in comments.
Well, yeah, you're supposed to put in the comment when I'm saying like what you learned about all those questions I just said, drop that into the chat.
Mhm.
Okay, please. All right, here we go. And I have not read anything but literally the first few words of this. So we'll do that. I really hate breaking in shoes. As I type, a pair of green Doc Martens sits under my bed, pristine, fresh, and boring. The thought of forcing my feet into the stiff leather terrifies me because I know the second I walk out, my feet will ache and blister. The elements will scratch and crease them. No matter how much pomade or balm I rub into them, I won't be able to keep the world from ruining my beautiful shoes. This fear is irrational, of course. No more than 5 feet from my coveted green boots lies another pair of Docs, this time in red. The tongue sags inwards and the heel sits back, creased from the way I jump whenever I am happy. The toe of my right shoe is scrapped with memories I can't quite recall. I love my red boots more than I can articulate. They remind me of cold autumn mornings, laughing with my mom and running to catch up to my friends. My red Docs weren't always comfortable. When they were gifted to me on a foggy Christmas, I wore them around my house with layers and layers of fuzzy socks, grimacing through the pain they inflicted on my poor feet. But what I remember more is how my world revolved around them for the next 3 weeks. I dedicated Pinterest boards to them, made Instagram collections, and spent countless hours on FaceTime with friends just to try on outfits. Despite all of this preparation and prelude, I have yet to wear them out. On some level, I knew my hesitation was ridiculous. Who feels anxiety surrounding shoes? It was the end of January before I finally debuted them to the world. Then the worst happened. I scraped the side of them badly. It seemed like such a big deal at the time. But if you asked me to find the scuff today, I don't think I would be able to. It's just one more in the sea of memories that my shoes hold. Each blister, graze, and furrow seemed so drastic when it happened. Now that I look back, all I see is an anthology of stories that have shaped my shoes perfectly to my being. All the discomfort I feel pays off. The anxiety melts away because I, like my boots, can weather the bumps and bruises of the world. The realization that maybe I need to deal with the discomfort and dilapidation of my shoes for them to truly be mine settles in. The scars make them more interesting, more me. Shoes seem like a pretty basic thing to think about. They're utilitarian, they're ubiquitous, everybody has them, but shoes are also fundamental. They're the foundation upon which we walk every day. They connect us to the world around us and take us places. They protect us, they help us stand up and stand proud. I think about all of that when I think about my Doc Martens. Life, like a pair of new Docs, isn't always comfortable or without a little pain, but when I'm brave enough to break them in and go walking is when I'm most free. And those green Docs, I'm pulling them out from under my bed and wearing them tomorrow. All right, so as we discussed, this is a class tonight. So please drop in, and there's maybe awards for participation. I don't know, probably not, Debbie. But
we'll do that next time.
Next time we should do that, actually, to be honest, now that I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
But drop into the chat. What did I learn about the student? How might this relate to one or more of the 5 traits? What didn't I learn that I wanted to learn about the student, and how this can be restructured? So please drop those into the chats.
And just so you know, Brad, I got a message from the parent of the student who wrote this could not be on tonight, and the parent was on for a little bit, but then they had to run to pick up the student. So, but they are open to hearing any feedback.
Okay, got it. All right. We got it kicked up a lot of judgment from me.
A shoe lover, yes. Yep. I learned about the writer's outlook about life, but not much about other elements.
Yep. A little superficial.
Yep. I mean, it was lovely. That's not the right word, but it was it was nicely written. It was nice to read.
Yeah. Well, see, this is where the whole like tell your story. This is like very common to see this. Okay. And because when people hear like tell your story or tell a story, they're like, oh, what really matters is like the narrative storytelling. Okay, so the words, the
imagery.
sentence structures, yeah, like the flowery language, all of that, right? But, and I think a lot of people are identifying this as well, I don't really learn anything about the student. Right, so, and so let me just kind of like talk through a few parts of the essay, because there's a number of things here that I think I see that, you know, people comment on or like, oh, this is good, but in reality, it's not that useful. Okay, so I'm going to focus on some of those things and explain why. But the key here is like, this does not prove success in college and beyond. So as I'm going through the essay, right? So the first thing that's really important here is your introduction. Okay, and while in a college admissions essay, or at least a Common App essay, you don't necessarily have like a thesis per se. What is really important is what I call guiding sentences. Okay, so this means that I need to have a pretty solid understanding from reading the beginning of your essay, how the rest of the essay is going to happen. How is it going to end? So if I'm, let's say, writing a book or a movie script, if I'm watching a movie, usually at the beginning of the movie, I have a pretty good sense of how the movie is going to end from the beginning. Okay, it's really about, oh, why am I still watching? It's because I'm trying to understand how it's going to end. All right. So in this case, though, I read the first paragraph and I'm thinking, how is this relevant? How is this relevant to the student? Okay. So it's about shoes, which, by the way, you'd be surprised. Like the number of students that actually write about shoes is pretty high. Okay.
Oh, I didn't even know that. That's
yeah,
interesting.
It's kind of a weird thing. I don't know why, but it's actually kind of high. All right. So that's number one. And so I'm kind of reading this. Okay, stiff leather. I'm seeing these different things. Oh, it's about my feet. Like I'm not really seeing like, how is this relevant for me understanding who the student is and if they're going to be successful in college and beyond. And if I get to that end of the first part of the introductory part of the essay, and I don't have an information of how is this relevant, now your admission as an admissions officer, I would be like, or any reader of anything, I'd be like, I guess I have to read the rest of it, but I'm now like already kind of mentally less excited, or not necessarily mentally checked out, but kind of a little bit. I'm less engaged, okay? Because I think this is probably going to be not great. All right, so that's number one. So at the beginning of the essay, I always want to have a very clear understanding of how this is relevant. And if I actually ask the reader, like, what's going to happen in this essay, they're probably going to be like mostly correct, okay, about what the essay is about. So that's one. Number two is like, I'm really not understanding anything about the student's background. I see jump when I'm happy. That's nice, right? I'm literally trying to pick out pieces of information about the student, okay? So this is a piece of information about the student. Okay, interesting. But that's like a few words, and it's not that compelling, okay? Then this is probably the most interesting part of the entire essay, okay? Because now I'm starting to get specifics. Oh, they're creating Pinterest boards, Instagram accounts, speaking with their friends or engaging with them. But I get really little information on like, what's the totality of that work, right? What did they learn about themselves? Like, did they end up with a bunch of followers? Are they just kind of doing this? Are they like, what's the reason or the rationale here? Like, what did they learn maybe through this process? Are they also really into photography? I have no idea, right? But these are like, at least like I'm looking at this and I'm like, maybe something is here, but then I really don't get any of that for the rest of the essay. The rest of the essay is more of like this philosophical type bent where, okay, I learned that they scuff their shoes. Great. Doesn't really matter to me. Sorry, that's a little blunt. But doesn't really like, it's not proving that they're going to be successful. Okay, is the scuff going to lead to something? All it does is like lead to some, like, it doesn't even about like how really upset they were, but they just kept wearing them at some point in the future, clearly. And so it doesn't really seem like I'm not really learning too much about that. Like, is this like some really important moment in their life that they scuffed their shoe that day and were very upset about it. I'm unclear about it. And then I get into this like philosophical stance, okay? And I see this a lot in essays, and it is not useful, okay? Because I'm not really learning that much about the student, or necessarily even how they think about the world. I might be starting to understand how they're thinking about the world, but they're utilitarian, they're ubiquitous, everybody has them, but shoes are also fundamental. Like, what does this matter? Why does this matter to the student? Okay, I don't learn that. All I learn is, okay, they're kind of waxing philosophical about this, but it doesn't really prove to me that, hey, I learned something about myself and I've actually changed my life as a result of that, right? So they're not proving that they've taken actions as a result of this, this profound experience from scuffing their shoes and continuing to then wear them and not being able to see the scuff anymore. Like, I'm not really learning how that's affected them and like what actions have they taken differently in their life as a result of it.
So Brad, I'm just curious, do you think though that there are pieces here that if done better, like there's a foundation here that could have been the start of something more?
Yeah, so this one's a tough one, to be honest. Okay. Usually I can identify something within any essay that I would say is a foundation that I would like maybe be able to work from that's going to create something compelling. But there's not like, there's nothing in here that really jumps out at me that I'd be like, okay, this is like a nugget of something to really work from.
The only thing that jumped out to me, and if you scroll up a little bit, is about the comment about in that last paragraph on the first page, I like my boots can weather the bumps and bruises of the world, the realization that maybe I need to deal with the discomfort and dilapidation of my shoes. If that was the start of showing then, and here are other examples in my life that I had to deal with discomfort.
Yeah, maybe. The issue is like, I don't have enough, like even from there, I don't have enough information, but I tend to agree, like that could be interesting. But I don't really even understand how that might tie to anything else in their lives at this point. So there's not really anything that I've like, the one thing that jumped out at me was, okay, can they use this scuff as like a starting point of like a broader journey of understanding about themselves? Like I could see that maybe happening, and maybe that ties into this point as well. But it would be, when we're providing feedback on this, we would be identifying these one or two things and saying, hey, this could be a starting point. But then we'd go through like everything that's like, here's what I wanted to learn that I didn't learn, and like how could that be related together. And in this case, there's just like some very broad categories, whereas usually it tends to be a little bit more specific, and we might see that in the next essay. Okay,
so I'm just curious, so like, would you say to this student kind of like go back,
I would
do some hard thinking, come back to me with more examples in your life, and then we can kind of recreate an essay?
We would send this student back to basically do the application plan in our platform that walks them through the 5 traits and brainstorm content related to all the 5 traits that they have, and then select which of those they should actually work from and determine whether or not they should use the shoes as kind of like a visual mechanism within the essay. Now, honestly, like you don't need those types of analogies or other things like that in your writing. Like that, using a good analogy, guess what, does not, or metaphor, does not prove you're going to be successful in college and beyond, typically speaking. I know people love using metaphors, and people are told that they need to use metaphors, or they see these examples online of people that have great, well-written essays that use metaphors. But when you actually ask an admissions officer what jumps out at you after reading some of those essays, it's actually not the metaphors part, which is interesting.
Yeah.
So this one is a difficult one, I would say. But I think there's something like, if you really wanted to use the shoes, if that was so meaningful to you, you could pull that in, but it's a small piece of the overall essay that's really kind of like the shoe is almost like an inciting incident for something else that's occurring, and actions that they've taken in their lives as a result of maybe like this, they had this scuff, they had this realization like about their shoes, and then that's like affected how they like literally have done a lot of things in their lives, right? Like I could see that happening. It's just I have so little information to be able to determine if that's even a path.
So that's the whole point. So you just said you have so little information, and if this goes to admissions officer, they have so little information about the student.
Yeah, so this is why, like, when you read an essay, like this is what's called reading flat, okay, which is basically, and this is literally, by the way, 4 in 5 students applying to Harvard, right, are reading flat, okay, like this is how bad, like, we have done as a society and a school system of teaching students like to think about their audience and like really understand what they care about, and then how to write about that is because, you know, if 4 out of 5 students even applying to Harvard are really struggling with that, like, you're probably you know, you're in a similar boat, and a lot of people are, but like in terms of the sentence level writing is good, right, and it's enjoyable to read. It's just like when I'm reading it, I'm not enjoying it because I'm like trying to find the information and I can't find it, which is a frustrating experience for me, because I like every admissions officer, when you read an application, you're like, I want this kid to be successful, okay, and you're just like, you're kind of disappointed every time that they have an opportunity to be successful and they don't take it. Yeah.
And to your point, successful doesn't mean they have to blow it out of the park and write this amazing essay. They need to write something that communicates more about them, that is meaty, that gives the admissions officer insight into who they are.
Yeah, for sure. And I've seen so many essays get into all the schools where you would read it and you'd be like, oh, this isn't very creative. And it's not. Right, but you'd be like, wow, the content here is really good, it's concise, it's very readable, it's very clear, I know exactly who the student is. That's what matters. Okay,
so Brad, before we go on to the next one, there's a really good question about wanting to know if you train your coaches or how your coaches get trained, because you can't read all the essays.
Yeah, thank goodness. My goodness, we like tens of thousands of essays every year. So yeah, we train everybody. It's the top 2% of all writing coaches in the world. Essentially, we get thousands of applicants per year. Only about 2% make it through our rigorous training and evaluation process. And most of the people tend to actually have backgrounds related to writing. So they're really good at like critically thinking about writing. So a lot of people have like masters in fine arts or masters in fine arts type programs. These are like, we're like journalists. So we have like playwrights, journalists, authors. We do have educators as well within the network, but it's all people that have like spent a lot of time generally like thinking about writing, providing feedback on writing, doing their own writing. They're exceptionally good at this. And then we train them on a lot of these like techniques. Okay. I can get into way more detail on that. But you know, we have about 100 writing coaches or so, and they're exceptional. Right. And every year, so the number one stat that I use, because every year we get like a bunch of kids into every single school, right? So but the most compelling stat is that 3 in 4 students that we work with get into 1 or more of their reach schools. Okay, so these are schools that are either highly selective or where their academic profile is below the average admitted student at the school. That's how we define it. Which, by the way, 3 in 4 students getting into 1 or more reach schools is like unheard of. Like that's really good success. Now, our students are also that are coming. A lot of them are very self-motivated. A lot of them are you know, they're not applying to institutions where they're below the academic bar, I would say, generally speaking. So, you know, they have a shot, right? But they're and a lot of them have extremely really interesting and compelling backgrounds. But they like, if you saw like how they were, like if you talked to them about how compelling they were for like an hour or two, and then you read their first drafts of essays, you would have no idea sometimes how compelling they were if they did it themselves, like the drafts. Like, but when you help them think through, oh, this is the most compelling content, let's make sure and map that to the different essays, and here's how you structure each of those essays. Now all of a sudden, like the first drafts you see are like pretty good, and then you can work from there. But when we see just like a first draft that somebody that we even haven't talked to at all come to us, a lot of times it's a struggle. It's stuff that, you know, not to use this as the example, but it's stuff like that, kind of like this or similar, which we may see in another essay that we take a look at.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Yep. And resilience is also a really good trait. You know, I see somebody mentioning like that matters a lot. Same thing as like drive, grit, those types of things. they fall in there. Okay, I'm just gonna randomly pick another essay because I think I gotta reshare my screen.
Yeah.
1 second, because see if I get the same essay or not when I reshare my screen. All right, cool. All right. Already, just when I see the first couple of words on this essay, I'm like, we'll see. Okay, because a lot of essays kind of start in this way, and sometimes they go great, and sometimes not. Okay, like when it starts with a time, just FYI. So I'm going to read it out loud. As I said, if you're the student or parent and you want to read it out loud, you can jump up here and read it out loud. That's fine. Or we can have a discussion after this, or Debbie and I can just chat about it. And as we go through this, drop in, what am I learning about the student? How does it relate to the traits? You know, what did I learn that I didn't? What didn't I learn that I wanted to learn? All that stuff in the chat. Super fun. All right, here we go. 6 a.m. Wednesday, week 3. Today, I would be training a new volunteer. I had stayed up late writing, and my body knew it. Ergo, I sat up in my tent, deciding to make it a great day. I asked the world for a good group. The world did not deliver. They shoved off the bus, 3 of the boys drowning the teacher's screams with their own. I would have to work harder for this to be a great day. Smiling, I led my volunteer forward, greeting the onslaught of instigating questions. Can we sacrifice someone to Slender Man today? I placed myself at the lead, containing their energy down rocky terrain. Caden, I called for the dozenth time as he weaseled past. Do you know where you're going? Yes, Caden retorted, prancing down the wrong trail. Me too, I adjusted, pivoting toward the clay station. My head buzzed like the yellow jackets dipping between us. The trio dedicated to violence sculpted voodoo dolls and threatened to murder each other. My volunteer urged Caden to stop tearing at his scabs, but this won't work without blood. I held out my clay rose. Caden, Nicholas, Bryce, look. Nicholas took it with surprising delicacy. May I show you how it's made? Their clay totems bloomed into roses. When sticks became swords, I again connected, inquiring about their interests. Bryce extolled Wreckfest. Nicholas lauded Slenderman. Caden whacked trees. You boys, knock it off, the teacher's voice bellowed from behind, undermining my efforts. By the time we reached macroinvertebrate watch, I needed to pause. Knowing the next station had seasoned educators, I turned to my co-lead, trusting my timing. Could you take over? She lit up, of course. Water churned over the beaver dam and settled into an eddy, where it carved a deep, calm pool. Taking the river's advice, I stepped aside. This was my element. I have come here to share and teach about the river since I was 6 years old. A clump of leaves released from above the dam swirled into the eddy before breaking off and flowing downstream. I understood this place and understood it inside myself. I watched my own spinning thoughts settle and drift away. I rejoined my co-lead, new energy in my core as the group emerged, raving about the bugs. Ahead lay the overlook. Sitting above the curling river is a highlight for anyone with time to linger. However, with the precipitous drop, I had to weigh skipping this moment. I looked at Caden, using all of his might to shove over a log, thoroughly wrapped in his surroundings. I watched the world from his perspective. I'd absorbed who he was throughout the day and trusted my instincts. He would be safe on the cliff. Before the overlook, I silently nodded the trio aside, and each gave their word to be safe. Their curiosity resonated with me. This could be their element too. This time, I let them pass me on the trail, and they hiked up to our vantage point. We arose, connected, ready for shared joy and piles of laughter. Time for games. Weaving through the tunnel of poplar saplings, I spilled out into the game clearing where I directed their chaos, adding to the fun. Keeping an eye on my watch, I timed the hike out. We emerged on the hill, standing once again where they first arrived. Gathering them once more, I crouched, ready, go, and together we ran down the hill to the puppet show. After the show, dressed in my opossum mask and furry coat, I let the kids pet my head and say goodbyes. As the bus pulled away, I waved to everyone, but especially to the trio. Because of them, I proved to myself I am able to choose my feelings and shape my perspectives. It had been a great day. All right, drop into the chat. What did we learn about the student? What didn't we learn that we wanted to learn about the student? How does this relate to the traits? All of that sort of fun stuff. Okay, we have something. This is a coalition app essay, which is similar to the common app essay. All right.
And somebody asked above that, if you saw the Brad.
I saw a mine. You did. That's great. Hey, we had like a 1 in 3 shot. I had 3 others unopened, so
yeah,
good. We're good. All right, so drop in what your thoughts are into the chat. Right? How does this relate to the traits? What do we learn about the student? All of that sort of fun stuff.
This is the mom. The student's not here. I'm totally excited that you read this, and I would love to hear people's incredibly critical feedback. Be as harsh as you can be.
Yeah, and Cecilia, what we want is also what your feedback is on this too. So, but let's get some other feedback first. Oh, we got somebody was drawn on the screen. We got a couple red lines here.
somebody said, I think they sent the message to me just by accident, but it said, love the leadership.
Okay.
Learn the writer has patience and ability to modify to meet the situation, but too much detail about the kids. Didn't learn anything about the writer.
Mm-hmm. Didn't understand it at all. All right. So this is actually like another really common thing that we see in essays, okay? Which is people writing about like one moment in time, okay? Doesn't mean you can't do that, but a lot of times moments lead to understanding about yourself that then affects other actions that you go on to take in your life. And that can be really compelling. Okay. So it's more about like an essay that's like a journey of like personal growth and understanding than necessarily one moment in your life. Okay. Now, as I was reading this, by the way, I was really struggling because there was like, I had like 50 questions in my mind of what was going on here that I didn't really understand. And I just kept like thinking about the questions. I'm like, are they going to get answered? And like, there was a lot of those going on in my mind. So like at times, like I was not even able to like concentrate personally on what I was reading. The number one question that I was trying to understand was, how old are these kids? I have no idea. What grade are they in?
Mm-hmm.
Why are they there? Is this a field trip? I guess. But there's also a new volunteer, but the new volunteer is like, what's their role in this? I have no idea. Okay. These were the questions in my mind that I kept trying to answer. And there's more, but those are just a few examples that were going unanswered. And it made it really difficult for me to read because I didn't have that context. Okay. And I think, you know, some of the comments here are probably related to that as well, right? Like not making sense, not having this understanding.
And again, just kind of pulling it back to the admissions officer, they don't have time to kind of make sense of the essay. You know, like it's either the essay's got to come across really well, or they don't have the time to kind of pick it apart.
The average time that an admissions officer spends reading an application is 8 minutes. Okay. Now, some are more, some are less, right? That's just the average. But typically speaking, like a lot of times I'll read an essay, for example, and like an important point is towards the end. And then I'm like, oh, this was actually interesting. And then I have to reread the essay to understand the essay in context with that point. And the point is with this whole thing is you don't want to leave this to chance. You don't want to leave it to your admissions officer trying to piece together the story themselves of what you're trying to say. You need to be really clear with your writing. Okay. So.
And what do you think about like the story kind of narrative of this, all the quotes?
The answer here is I don't mind quotes. I don't even mind some vivid imagery at points, but this is way too much of it. Okay. So, for example, stuff that like really didn't really do much for me is like I would come in here and I'm like, water churned over the beaver dam. I'm like, I don't know how this is relevant. This is my element, so maybe this is relevant. I come here to share and teach about the river. Oh, now I'm finally getting some context, but I'm most of the way through the essay, right? So it's like there's like these different pieces of this where I'm like, how much does this kind of fully matter, and like what is the main point that this student is trying to make to me to help them understand? So is this an essay that's about leadership? Is this an essay that's about how much they enjoy working with other students and how that might relate to future ambitions or goals? Is this an essay about how they trained a new volunteer, which is what I thought it was about, and apparently was not about at all?
Which could have been good.
Yeah, which could have been good, right? So I'm like, okay, stayed up late writing. Oh, maybe this is going to be I actually thought this was literally going to be about like teaching kids how to write. Because it mentions writing, and then there's no other writing that occurs in this essay. And in a tent, okay, great. This was fun. The world did not deliver. That's a great line, right? Now I'm like, okay, so this is set up, but at this point I'm literally thinking like, okay, this essay is about training a volunteer. There might be something associated with writing in it. They're in a tent, so maybe camping. And there's a group involved. Like that's kind of where I'm at. And then like there's a problem. Something did not deliver, right? But it's probably going to get better, because otherwise why would they be writing about it? So like that's the context that I have at this point. So I really think this essay is going to be about training a new volunteer, and it's not. Okay. And training a new volunteer could make for a pretty compelling essay, or part of a broader essay that can be pretty compelling. But I'm not getting that. And then like Slender Man, I have no idea.
I know, yeah.
Okay. Like, so I'm like, what are we, is that a thing these days? Like, how old are these kids? Like, what is this? And so there's just like too many of those types of things where I don't really have a good understanding. I don't really know why there's like voodoo dolls references in here. Is that something that really happened, or is that a little bit contrived? Some students,
Yeah,
like,
I got a little.
it almost felt
too.
a little bit contrived.
Yeah, I didn't
some of
know
the
if this
things.
was going into like a made up story to get across the point. I wasn't quite sure what was real, what
Yeah.
wasn't.
So let's just kind of get down to it here, okay? Which is basically there's a couple of pieces of relevant. So what I do is, like when I'm working with students, and let's say I'm like on a call, like I will literally just have them. I'll say, okay, here's what I want you to do right now. I want you to go through and I want you to highlight anything that is actually a really important point. And that is it. And then we just look at all of the space that's not highlighted. And guess what? Everything that's not highlighted is basically like, that stuff is going. It's gone. Okay. Like that. And so the point that I'm bringing up here is this could be an interesting start to the essay if it's an essay about training the volunteer, or something associated with writing, right? Or this may need to be changed if the essay is about something else. Because what I'm doing at the introduction is guiding the reader to understand what's coming. Okay. The rest of this, a lot of this can be summarized as my students were a disaster. Here's 2 examples of them being a disaster, and that's enough. Okay. And then you're like, how am I going to solve this disaster of students? Okay. Or how am my volunteer is like, who knows, has quit by now, who knows, right? Like, but like, how am I going to help my volunteer understand how to do this, or, whatever it is, right? But most of this can break down in a short period. This is my element, like, okay, the beaver dam, like this area really matters. Share and teach about the river really matters apparently, but like what, why? Like that's not important, like is not covered here. I just kind of get back to the story about these students and playing games. Like it doesn't quite compute. So I need to have like more context there, and I need to identify what is the really important point here. Like, are you actually having like an effect on this group of students in a significant and meaningful way? Or did you get through to them in some way? Like, how did you do that? And by the way, if this is the story that you're trying to tell in your essay, that should maybe be like 40% of the word count of your entire essay maximum. And then
Brad,
you need to move on to other topics.
So Brad,
Go ahead, Debbie.
Cecilia is just sharing that the purpose of the essay was supposed to be about her daughter choosing to have a good day despite the struggles that she talks about, and kind of that she was making the decision about how she feels and choosing to make it a happy day, even though it was turning out to be a struggle.
Yeah. So great point, right? So let's say if that's the theme that you want to roll with here. Okay. What I need is not just one example of that. I need like multiple examples of how that gets applied in your life. Okay. Because it can be a good thing. All right. And so one way to do that is I asked the world for a good group. The world did not deliver, but I did. Okay. Like, and you just like with those, adding those words there, now all of a sudden I understand where this essay is heading, even in a better way, even though I probably sensed that already. And now I have the context that what's coming is a story about like a really bad situation that I turned into a great situation, and exactly the theme that you've talked about. But about 40% of the word count can be this story, can tie in some of the elements of the beaver dam being in your element, teaching about the river, students maybe not listening, but you kind of got them to listen. And this actually play games and you realize, hey, this wasn't a great start to the day, but it's fantastic. And that's how like a moment.
That's how I approach
so
other things in life
and
too.
like how I approach my whole life. And here's examples of like me approaching my life in this way, right? That I've literally from this experience gone on to take actions that are different than maybe I would have done otherwise because I have this different outlook on life. And guess what? Then you have another example or like 2 or 3 more examples that you include in your essay. And now those examples can start showing other traits that you might have. Maybe it's like a situation that you were in and you were like, oh, this is terrible. But you identified like something way to make it better and you made it better, right? And now that's showing some leadership, right? Or, oh, like you didn't really understand something. You're like, you know what? I'm going to learn about it, right? And make it better, right? And now you have some like intellectual curiosity, right? That gets tied in there. So there's a lot you can do under that theme. The key is like, you have to really deep, like identify what matters and what you want to tell here, and then just get rid of the rest of it. Okay. Because the level of detail here, especially between
It's too much, and you get and as a reader, you're getting
this
lost.
and this, like most of this is not like I as I said, these questions just kept jumping into my mind over and over and over again, and they just kept going unanswered. And once I even have one question in my mind that doesn't get unanswered, that get answered very quickly, like within the next sentence, now your reader is starting to think about other things than your actual writing. Okay. And that's a problem. So if you think about like, go ahead, Cecilia.
I just wanted to say thank you. I'm hearing that it's really context is too vague. And yes, it's a school field trip. They're 4th graders. She cut that out. She's teaching an adult. She wanted to show leadership that way. But nobody knows what's happening on this field trip. It's not coming through.
Right.
Yeah. And by the way, like the teaching of another volunteer could be great, right?
Even in the fact that the volunteer is an adult.
Yeah, and that too, like that would be helpful context. Like so much of this is like, it's so context dependent. And whenever I teach any type of writing, not just college admissions essays, it's about making sure the right contextual information is available, right, to understanding something. And by the way, a lot of students struggle with that because they're telling a story that they know extremely well, and the other people don't know extremely well. Right. So it's kind of hard to identify what is the most important pieces of information.
So Brett, I don't know, and we didn't plan this, but people were asking, and this is something maybe we will plan next time, but do you have, I don't know if you can pull up quickly, do you have an example of a good essay that you could like walk through that, that kind of gives the comparison, since we, read these other ones that need more improvement?
So let me pull up one that I actually can share. Like, because everything we do with students is like really confidential. Basically.
Well, that's good to know, so people don't realize when they're
like I literally can't just like pull up essays that that our students have. Let me just pull up two, and these are examples of essays that I use like all the time. But I'll actually show like a first draft, like the first version of it, and then the final version, and we'll just like read them really quickly, without like going through all the feedback and like super detail associated with this. But this is a student that got accepted in a bunch of institutions. She ended up at the University of Michigan in like a great LSA program there. It's like a really difficult program to get into. But let me pull this one up. I always like this particular essay. It's kind of fun. It's like, you'll see a lot of similarities just from like a storytelling perspective in terms of, especially in the first drafts from what we had just seen. So yeah, okay. And I actually don't even have the real final version, but it's just like what I call like a near final version. But it's pretty close to it. But you can see what's happening in it. So let me just share my screen. We'll read through these two essays really quick, wrap up, and all of that sort of fun stuff. All right, I got the two of them. Draft one. All right, so this is what I call the burrito essay, because it's literally about a burrito. Okay, all right, I'm going to read through this. Looking down, I saw the pieces of shredded pork starting to fall out of the gaping hole. The woman gawked at me from the other side of the food bar as I tried to think of an excuse. Her choice of fillings was awful. How could she expect me to wrap over 2 scoops of 3 cheese queso and shredded pork without at least half the filling squirting out? I'm new, I blurted, using the same excuse I had given at least 50 previous customers. I can see, she replied, and awkward silence followed, and I knew I had to save her dead burrito. It was my second week at my summer job at Qdoba Mexican Grill, and my lumpy, soggy burritos were a daily routine. I couldn't understand why I struggled so much with making burritos when I was succeeding in a tough course load. I understood the first part of folding it like a dumpling, but rolling the burrito was a whole other story. No matter how hard I tried, the burrito would rip open, fall apart, squirt out liquid, or better yet, all three as the end result. It was horrendous. I used to cringe every time someone asked me for a burrito because I knew that the end result was not going to be pretty. This was my hardest burrito yet. Instead of freezing up and shoving the mess to another worker like I always did before, I forced myself to continue despite her angry glare. Quickly heating another tortilla, I transferred the contents to the lower half so I could save more room to roll over. After lifting the cover, I finally noticed the sogginess was coming from the pico de gallo and beans. After draining, I tried to make it quickly, but my heavy-handed pressure caused it to rip open. I tried again with gentle fingers, but it just fell apart. Taking a deep breath and with shaky hands, I tried another method, folding horizontally with firm pressure. To my delight, it stayed. Rolling the burrito, I wrapped the orange foil over and gave it to the customer, chiming, "Thank you, enjoy." I almost saw a hint of a smile on her face before she left. That was my proudest moment all year. Since the beginning, I dreaded how the burrito would decide to turn on me. But looking at the obstacle as a fun challenge helped me make the burrito I could actually serve to customers. It in no way was perfect, but who can make a perfect burrito? Instead of thinking I couldn't do this because of potential problems, I changed my mindset to I will try my best. And if mistakes happen, that's just a natural part of the process. Just like the different burritos I have made, I will encounter many different challenges that I will need to adapt to. Even though the bigger challenges carry greater potential for mistakes, the reward is so much greater, not just for me, but for other people. Sometimes the whole process is just as if not rewarding than the end product. Working for the answer is more enjoyable than having it automatically given to me. I never underestimate a potential challenge, no matter how small, because those may even be the hardest to stay focused on. I look at mistakes as opportunities to grow and find a better way. I look forward to challenges, big or small, that I will face in not just college, but life. Draining the distractions and little problems will help me overcome challenges more easily. How can I adjust my teaching so people understand what glomerulopathitis and projectile motion are? Where does the 8-mile Kensington bike path continue? Life is going to throw many more lumpy burritos at me, but I know what the next step will be. All right. So you can see some similarities here, even to other essays, right? Narrative focused on kind of one moment or one situation, and a lot of like detailed narrative, flowery language type writing. And I start pulling out pieces of information of understanding about the student, like, hey, they actually are resilient. They're solving this burrito problem. It's frustrating to her because she's probably doing really well in school, but struggles with this. Actually, it's funny. It's a female, even though a lot of people when I read this think it's a male that wrote the essay. But it has like some interesting parts to it, but it's there's just so much more you could do with it, I think is the answer, right? So much of this is like, how do you shorten all of this story related content and then get it down? And then at the end, I'm reading this and I'm like, adjust my teaching. Like, what is she talking about? That sounds really interesting. And it's like a throwaway sentence. Like, why is this glomerulitis word in here? Projectile motion. And like, she's teaching that? Okay, what's going on here? Like, can I learn more? Right? Is that relevant here? Because I'm just learning about this burrito at Qdoba Mexican Grill. Okay, so let me show you what this kind of turns into. And by the way, this student wrote this draft, but she had told me she went through like a ton of revisions before she even sent this version into us. Okay, so like spent hours and hours on this with teachers, friends, etc. And we see this very commonly, especially amongst very motivated students. They like have spent significant time on this and then they're not heading in the right direction, but you can like have an intervention and get them to a really good version very quickly. Okay. With like, so they might've spent like 20 hours of effort to get to that. And then it's like 4 to 5 hours effort. And then they're like done with a much better essay. Okay. So you might as well just start in the first place with the better essay. All right. Here's like the near final version of this. Okay, the pieces of shredded pork started falling out of the gaping hole. The woman gawked at me from the other side of the counter. How could she expect me to wrap over 2 scoops of 3-cheese queso and shredded pork without at least half the filling squirting out? I'm new. I started for the 13th time that day. It was an excuse for my continued failure. I'd have been on the job at Qdoba Mexican Grill for 3 weeks and my lumpy, soggy burritos were a daily humiliation. I couldn't understand why making a burrito was so hard when I was having no trouble with calculus problems or memorizing hundreds of parts in anatomy. During wrapping, the burrito would rip open, fall apart, squirt out liquid, or on the worst days, I fell victim to all 3. But at that moment, I mentally decided, that's it. I'm going to solve this problem and figure out how to wrap a burrito. I forced myself to continue despite the 2 glaring eyes that watched every fold. Quickly heating another tortilla, I transferred the contents to the lower half so I can make room to fold over. I noticed the sogginess was coming from not draining the beans in pico de gallo well enough, so I wiped off the excess moisture. Then I tried a different wrapping method, a horizontal fold. To my delight, it stayed. Rolling the burrito, I wrapped the orange foil over and gave it to the customer, chiming, "Thank you, enjoy." I almost saw a hint of a smile on her face before she left. After that day, I continued to find little improvements in my burrito making career and happily helped a new worker named Jasmine with properly positioning and smearing the guacamole and wrapping it over. From successfully making different burritos, I learned that persistence and studying the problem from different angles is the best approach to helping me improve. I thought I was just naturally good at calculus and anatomy, but even trying a different approach to calculus helps me solve the problem more efficiently. Anyone can learn anything as long as they set their mind to it. I now look at mistakes as opportunities to grow and find a better method. I look forward to future challenges that I might have to solve using different methods. Draining the little problems will help me more easily create a solution. As Health Occupation Students of America Pathophysiology team leader, my responsibility is helping my team members learn about diseases and preparing them for competitions. I used to provide written notes from the book, but I saw that many of them struggled to understand glomerulitis because it was so similar to other urinary diseases like nephritis. I decided to test new approaches to teaching the material. I matched pictures with diseases, made a polycystic kidney using bubble wrap, and played a Be the Doctor game. I discovered that learning with written notes and memorization worked for me, but that interactive learning through games provided both my team members and me with a deeper understanding of the material. My strategy made an impact. My team scores went from 60 to 90% on quizzes, and 2 of my teammates placed as finalists at the state leadership conference. Burritos and Hosa taught me to look at problems with a different viewpoint and work together with others to achieve goals. As a doctor, I may use different approaches to find an underlying problem. For example, I might have to use a cardiogram or Doppler cardiography just to find a tiny clot in the heart that could be affecting the whole body. I also need to work together with the patient to find the best treatment. Life is going to throw many lumpy Doritos at me, but I know how to improve.
Wow, what a difference.
And by the way, I still don't even think this is the greatest essay, but the student obviously makes choices that how they want it to be, right? But like there's a number of things that I'd be like, I'm not the most excited about, but this is like really good.
A great improvement from, I love the story of the burrito, and it's still there, but it's not.
Yeah, but look how much shorter it is.
It's not taking
and it lost
over
nothing.
The essay. Right. It's not taking
it lost
over
absolutely nothing. And it's now like, what is this word count here? It's like way less, basically. Right. It's 300 words instead of 650 words, essentially. right? So you can really decrease that.
And she sets it up more, the lessons that she's learning from the burrito.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I'm going to figure this problem out. So now it's like, oh, it's about problem solving, right?
Right.
Which the HOSA thing is also about, right? And like some of this stuff, I'm like, you could probably cut this whole paragraph and it's not, you would lose nothing, right? This is the one area that I'm like, okay. But you know, some students, they really like it, right? But here's the single most important line in this entire essay is right here.
Because it's proof.
It's proof. Okay. So you can say all you want. Oh, this is nice. Oh, you learned something, right? About yourself. But and this is really good, by the way. This realization right here is awesome, right? Learn that it worked for you, but then it actually worked better for the team and even was better for you by doing it this other way. But then the impact and using quantitative numbers or qualitative impact is so compelling. And you're like, oh, this is nice what you did. And you're like, oh, okay. So what you did is really good, right? Like it had this massive impact on her teammates, right? And then it ties to like her future ambitions, which ties really nicely to the HOSA thing and like problem solving, right? As a doctor, right? So it then kind of like gives me an overarching view of like, oh, I can kind of picture her in college, what she might do in college, what she might do in her career, how all this problem solving stuff kind of all relates to that. And it says a lot within very few words.
So Brett, so somebody has a question that says, you know, you pointed out that sentence about proof that, you know, her team scores went from 60 to 90%. Would that information already be on the activities list? Like, I guess.
Yeah. So the answer to that is number one, it should be, but a lot of students just literally don't put it. They focus on responsibilities, not impact. Okay. So that's number one. I see that very regularly. Number two is don't think that way. Okay. And here's why. Is like, you should not expect your reader to put the whole story together themselves. Okay. So if they're reading the activities list, they might read that first. They might read this first. They might understand the activities list, but then they're now reading this essay. Are they really going to remember everything that they just read in the activities list specifically related to this HOSA thing? Probably not. Okay.
And they might not have made the connections.
Yeah, they might not make the connection. Make it for them.
Especially if it's important, if it's a central piece of the student.
And it's really a critical piece for this particular like moment in this particular essay. So totally fine to repeat like 10 to 15 words of content. Where you get in trouble is when you like start repeating like hundreds of words or making this like a resume where you're like just repeating everything in your activities list. What you're doing is you're delivering incredibly important and relevant information at the exact moment that they need it without requiring them to figure it out. Okay. That's really, really, really important. And I can't stress that enough. Because I get this question a lot when I'm working with students, like, well, it's over there. And it's like, but do you trust your reader to make that connection? And like, think of the number of applications they're reading per day. Like they get exhausted.
Yeah.
Like just think of how mentally exhausting that must be. So don't do as much of your work for your reader as possible. That is the answer. Okay. You literally need to tie it all together for them in a nice bow and, you know, be like, oh, Cecilia's daughter is in, right? Done, right? Like it's over, right? And that's kind of like the feeling that you want to have them getting like every moment as they're reading through the application and all the pieces, and like they're just kind of seeing how everything fits together in this like broader narrative of like who you are as a person without having to like make detailed leaps together, detailed connections. You want them to think about like the overarching connections of like, oh, the student's really driven. Oh, they're also really, really intellectually curious. Oh, they're driven and intellectually curious again, right? And so you're just kind of like reinforcing their thoughts or building upon the thoughts that they're already having about the student. Don't rely on them tying together every little detailed piece of information. Because like, guess what? Like when I was applying to college, I'll give you an example. Like I took, and this is before like there was a lot of online stuff, you know, because Debbie and I are old.
I'm older.
but we're old. And so this is before all the online stuff. And I was like, oh, you know, like my school doesn't offer a couple of classes, so I'm gonna take these like self-study these AP exams. I literally had like the textbooks, right? Like I self-studied, took the exams, and did well on them. Now, the colleges would see I got good scores on those exams, right? But they wouldn't know to tie it to my class schedule, which they didn't exist because I didn't like filtered it off of it, right? I just had the exams. And I didn't mention at all anywhere in my application that I like self-studied for these because I had no idea that that was even important or relevant or anything. I had no clue. I had no clue what I was doing. And it just so happened to come up in my interview for MIT. Like, I guess I mentioned it. And when you look at like the 3 to 4 sentences of notes that the MIT admissions officer made on my application, like that was one of the things that was mentioned. Wasn't on my application at all.
So right. So the point is you're lucky that they caught that.
Oh, I'm super lucky. And like, I'll give another example. Like I started my own band. We wrote our own music. We booked our own shows when I was a kid in high school. And I didn't write about any of that on any of my applications. None of that, nothing. And it just so happened to come up in my interview as well. Right. So this is like, it's luck a lot of times. And that was also one of the notes. Like, oh, this is cool. They made their own band, like with their own shows. Like that shows like initiative and like self-learning, like drive, like all sorts of different things. Right. And like I had no wonder why I didn't get into Princeton and Stanford. You know, I didn't apply to many schools because we didn't apply to many schools back in the day. But yeah, like no wonder why I didn't get it. I didn't even know it included any of this stuff. I was clueless, completely clueless. But this is why it's so important to understand what the admissions officers are actually looking for and identifying like everything about you and then tying it to like that you want to include and then tying it to the application and then tying that up like in a nice bow for your reader, essentially.
Well, Brad, this was great. I love, but reading the live essays, and hopefully that gives people a real sense of, what some students are putting together and how it can be improved and why it should be improved. And it's really actually, when you understand some extent the principles and what colleges are looking for, it's not hard to improve it. You just have to look at these essays in a different eye. Oh yeah, for sure. And I'll just say like this, the essay, that Burrito essay that we were looking at, that student, this is not a perfect essay by any means, right? If I was writing it, like there would be lots of changes to it. But this student was extremely successful, right? So she got into like UC Berkeley, she went to University of Michigan, she got into like Vanderbilt, like a bunch of other institutions, like did extremely well, right? With her, I think she got into UPenn as well, her applications, and like it doesn't have to be perfect, right? The writing. But what does need to exist is the content that proves you're going to be successful in college and beyond based off of like your experiences and those types of things, right? That's what really matters. And as you can see, like that's what's coming across in that essay. Yep, absolutely. Okay. Okay. Well, thanks again, Brad. Yeah, thanks. Go to prompt.com/road to college if you want. You guys, we actually sent out an email. We're sending right now as we're talking. So, so you guys, if you're interested in getting the $10 off, it's just a reminder if you want to, act on that quickly. This is the beginning of November. There's still time left. You don't have to feel crazily, rushed or anxious, but I would do it now. Yeah. Yeah, because let me just tell you one other thing. I mean, Brad and his team is great, but they will get crushed. They will get crushed the closer. Yeah, at some point we actually had to stop taking some students in October, but and also do yourself a favor, because like the closer you write to the deadlines, the less willing your student is to like really put forth a lot of effort to make detailed changes that might like significantly improve their writing. And so do yourself a favor, especially if you're regular decision, like don't wait till the week after Christmas to do all of this work. There's a lot of people that do that, by the way, and it's kind of annoying and frustrating because if you haven't had a senior before going through this process, like that's like the worst week of the year probably for like just like, and it's supposed to be vacation. If you haven't, it's supposed to be vacation, but like you're just working on applications the entire time. Don't do that to yourself. And one last thing, and I'll just say this. I mean, I do this in all my stuff. This isn't even related to college essays, but sometimes things just need to, I call it marinate. Like you need to be able to write something, walk away from a day or two, and then come back to read it, because you will read it and your student will read it with different eyes. and you'll hear it differently. And so you need to have that time. So if you're really doing this in the last 5 days, you won't have that time to come back and kind of read it again.
Yep. Awesome. Well, this was fantastic. Debbie, we always have such a good time doing
It
this.
is fun.
We should do
It
these
is
almost
fun,
every
Brett.
day. No, let's not do that.
We can move on from college essays. We can start critiquing.
Oh,
other
we should
people's
start
writing.
just doing. We should actually have like our own like show, because I think people would like it.
Oh my
let's not do
goodness.
that. All right.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Have a good one. Bye
Okay.
bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.